It's funny how certain things we learn in school really stick with us. Certain foundation concepts, like our ABCs or calling 911 in case of an emergency, become almost habitual. But what about grounding techniques to help stop a panic attack? Or maybe even steps to help a friend out of a mental health crisis? What if, as quickly as I could say my ABCs, I knew these important and even life-saving facts? On July 16th, the 988 dialing code was launched. So now, if you dial 988, you'll be redirected to the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. This is an amazing step in making help more accessible. And just like 911, it can be taught in schools, normalized, and eventually become habitual. So let's take this and do more. Now, growing up, anxiety tended to manifest itself in different ways, a little bit through elementary, then middle school. It wasn't until high school that it did start to impact my daily life. Certain things like standardized tests really just would send all these intrusive worries into my head and make my heart just start racing. The ultimate diagnosis was an anxiety disorder. As the pressures of high school increased, ultimately, so did my fear of failing. But ironically, the more time I spent worrying about failure, the more likely that falling behind in school became an actual possibility. I went through the steps, I got some help, and I have a great support system. And going to college actually went really well. So by the time I landed my very first adult job, I figured that maybe magically all my anxieties were just cured. But it turns out that being an adult is pretty hard. And slowly those high school insecurities started to creep back into my life. Add that with a global pandemic in 2020, and I started to feel all the progress I had made slip away. This was really frustrating because it had been about 10 years since I started this whole process, and why didn't everything just stick and work? But this time I had to try something a little different. I learned concepts of cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT for short. With CBT, you challenge your anxious thoughts and feelings and ultimately change your behavior. I had this light bulb moment where I knew that I had to accept uncertainty and imperfection if I was going to live the life that I really wanted to live. Now, fast forward to today, and I'm doing much better at managing my mental health. It's always going to be an ongoing battle with anxiety. It's still going to be there. But now, through a little bit of trial and error, I've cultivated this toolbox of techniques. And I know that I can manage whatever gets thrown at me. But in the past couple of years, I started to wonder, what if I'd been given this toolbox a lot earlier in life? And what if perhaps I've always had this toolbox, but never really learned how to use it? Perhaps we need to incorporate mental health into our school's curriculum so that wellness and coping skills become, as I said, habitual for kids. I know for all the educators out there who deal with K through 12, it's going to require some rearranging core curriculum, but I'd argue that it's going to be very much worth it if the kids are more mentally healthy. I recently read an article about mental health needs here in northeastern Pennsylvania. This one came from the Scranton Times-Tribune, and COVID hit Scranton, the northeastern Pennsylvania region, and schools across the country pretty hard. As mental health crises increased, unfortunately, the help available started to decrease. So schools around the area have begun to pool their resources. And in Scranton, a social emotional learning curriculum has been developed. Over in Carbondale, art therapy has become a part of students' daily routines. And I think these are all amazing steps. I think we just have to take this and keep going. And we need to make mental health education more preventative than reactive. According to the National Alliance on Mental Illness, over half of lifetime mental illnesses begin before the age of 14. By educating teachers, parents, but most importantly, students, on the signs of mental illness, I think we could save a lot of lives. Now, therapy and medication are often prescribed to kids with mental illness, and these are excellent tools. But I realized with myself that until I had a holistic understanding of my mental health, these things weren't going to be as effective. As an ambitious teenager, self-care always came last, and I needed to take care of myself if this whole picture was going to work. I must also mention that therapy and medication are extremely expensive, and I was very lucky to have financial support from my family. And without this, specialized therapies for borderline personality disorder or OCD, it's just a lot to put on an individual. If we teach children preventative coping skills, then if they do need to walk into a therapist's office, they're gonna have a head start. And from a practical standpoint, they'll save some time and money in the long run. We also need to teach kids more about mental health at a younger age, because then the stigma will start to become erased sooner. I remember it was really hard because no one ever talked about mental health in school. And on those days where you didn't feel your best, you felt like either very lonely walking through the halls, or almost if you had to go get help, it was like a secret agent mission where no one else could see you in the hallways. And we need more empathy for kids who are facing these issues, and just more consideration for kids who are going through the difficult process of therapy. So for a student with, say, social anxiety, they might have the same fear response to standing up in front of their class and speaking as if a grizzly bear just came and walked right in front of them. Except instead of running away, their therapeutic response is to just stay put and just let that grizzly bear be there. And this is really scary, if you can imagine. So this is why just empathy and understanding for children is a really crucial thing. We need to support students and empower them with tools to help their mental health. Students' feelings should always be validated and never ignored. There is one line we don't want to cross. We don't want to overstep, and we want kids to be able to solve their problems on their own. Let's go back to that student with social anxiety. A well-meaning teacher might exempt them from class presentations for the rest of the year. And this might be okay while they build up their coping skills or learn how to figure it all out. But I've read this article in Psychology Today from Dr. Veronica Raji, and she warns against any kind of permanent accommodation. If we permanently accommodate the anxiety, it's only going to make it worse in the long run. It's sort of a sneaky form of avoidance. The anxiety, as much as we want to avoid it and run from it, it's always going to come back and find us. In that same publication, I read another good point made by Dr. Peter Gray, and he made a good case for autonomy as a case for just letting kids problem solve on their own. If they're not free to express themselves with autonomy, they'll only become more anxious and more depressed. It's kind of a balancing act. I know, we're trying to all figure it out. But it's a balancing act that I think is really essential to the well-being of our future generations. I'm going to conclude this proposal of sorts by asking you all to keep your minds open, to keep our kids' minds healthy. If your child's teacher wants to incorporate mental health into the curriculum, I ask that you please say yes. Change is scary, and mental illness is a really tough thing to talk about. But we already talk about a lot of hard things with kids to prepare them for the future. When we say fire, they respond with stop, drop, and roll. So when we say mental health, they should be able to respond with healthy coping mechanisms that will carry them throughout adulthood. And if today you or your child needs some help, here are some resources. Thank you.